Hi, I'm Dr. Mark Earnest. It's been more than 25 years since I started medical school and I first met my cadaver. And despite those years, those memories are still incredibly vivid. The smell of formalin, that oily feel of the scalpel and the plastic sheets that drape the body, that cold touch of the skin, and that dry, anxious feeling in the back of my throat when I walked in that first morning. That was my first intimate encounter with death. It was also my first real task of doctoring in ways that I really only appreciate now. In medical training, we spend hours upon hours learning to negotiate all sorts of tasks. Procedures, algorithms, how to develop differential diagnoses. But attached to each of those tasks is a human being, which means that attached to each of those tasks is a meaning. And not just one meaning, but layers and layers of meaning. This is true in medicine in a way that's really not true in many other vocations. In those first moments with my cadaver, those human elements were so large. Fear, anxiety, dread. I had to overcome those to proceed with the task. And I did. I unwrapped the body, I reached for that shiny new scalpel and that crisp new dissection guide, and I got on with what I was there to do. Explore the human body and learn its secrets. But in medicine, the task and the meaning are always present. And the key really is in balancing them. Within a few days, I'd settled into the task of dissection. The smell of formalin no longer made my pulse race. All that anxiety and all that fear was gone, and the task of cutting open a human body had just become routine. But as I discovered, the task of balancing is really never done. A few weeks later, I unwrapped the hands and I just froze. Because there they were, hands. Hands that had done what hands do. They'd held another hand, they'd waved goodbye, they'd rocked a baby, touched a lover, wiped away tears. And one thing about these hands was especially striking. Her nails were painted bright red. What did that mean? What were her last hours like? Did she get up that day like any other and paint her nails, unaware that it would be one of her last acts? Or maybe did somebody else paint them? Say maybe her daughter knew she was nearing the end of her life and she didn't know what else to do, so she painted her nails, knowing that her mother would want them that way. In that moment, the task of dissection had to pause to make way for the meaning that was attached to it. But more common, and I think far greater risks, are those moments when the task at hand just eclipses the meaning, when you so lose sight of the human element that it just is gone entirely. It'll happen more often than you can imagine. Something of great importance will happen to your patient, and for whatever reason, maybe you're too tired, you're too busy, but you'll feel nothing. The weight of the task will simply have crowded out all the meaning. Finding this balance is a lifelong effort. Let me offer you some tips on how to do it. First, develop self-awareness. Be aware of how you feel, pay attention to it. Full or empty, you got to listen to yourself. Second, make some time for reflection. You really need a regular, quiet space in your life to process all that happens to you in your work. You got to make room for it. Third, develop and practice habits of reflection. And that's whatever works for you. Writing, meditation, prayer, do it regularly. And finally, and I think most important of all, find the person and the patient. I was in my third year of medical school when I first began working with patients. They didn't let us talk to many people until then. I carried note cards and I wrote down all the details of their illnesses and their care. And despite that, I just couldn't keep it all straight. I lost details, I got patients confused, I couldn't remember what lab results were or who had what and what tests scheduled. But among my first patients was a man who was a long way from home, a long way from his family, and very alone. And we got along great. I liked him and I hung out in his room a lot. I got to know him incredibly well. I knew the names of his grandchildren, I knew their quirks, I knew about his garden and where he liked to fish. And I knew if you asked him, what do you like? I knew he would answer, Diet Coke over crushed ice. When I was asked the details of his care, I didn't even have to look at my notes. I could just remember them. It was really a great revelation to me that when you come to know your patients as people and when you come to genuinely care about them, the tasks of their care become meaningful in their own right. They become easier to remember and more important. In 1925, a doctor named Francis Peabody summed this up nicely. The secret of the care of the patient is caring for the patient. Trust me on this one. If you learn to love your patients, 25 years from now, you'll still love your work.